Let's see our agenda for today. So first we'll be starting with the risk management and compliance, that we are going to talk about how you can fortify your defenses using management and compliances. Then we'll be talking about the zero trust, and zero trust will be talking about identity and access management and their best practices. Then there will be incident response drill, handling cybersecurity incident, how you can handle them, and there will be few questionnaires as well in between, and steps in incident response, that what are the phases of incident response, you can say. Then there will be creating an incident response plan, how you can create an incident response plan, implement it. So maybe we'll be doing a small tabletop exercise for everyone so that you guys can guide me what steps you will need. So I want 100% input from everyone according to your decision making. We'll see who's doing great. Then there will be a case study where we'll be talking about any incident happened and how they worked with it. So that's what we are going to do. And this will be a two-way learning. So let's start with our first thing, risk. So we are going to talk about risk management. The very first thing that we should know is risk. What is risk? How will you define risk? So if you see, it says the likelihood of threat exploiting a vulnerability and thereby causing impact on business operation. Yep, that's correct. But in simple terms, in layman's language, how we can understand risk. When we are talking about risk, risk refers to the probability of happening something. Now that something which I am saying, this something can be good or bad. Yes. Now, when we are talking about bad, we always say that there is a risk, right? So we always define risk word in, you can say, in loss, right? Or in bad situations, right? Something bad can happen. But here risk can be positive also. It can be good also, right? So you have share market, right? You invest your money in share market. If you lose something, you lose your money. That's negative risk. But if you earn something, if you are in profit, then that is positive risk. Yes. So risk means probability of happening something in layman terms. But in general terms, how we will define the risk. So risk refers to the possibility of harm or loss or profit that can occur when anything happens. So if we talk about cybersecurity risk, basically we always define the risk in the form of loss, right? So whenever any harm or loss happens, whenever a vulnerability is exploited by a threat, that is risk. Now what things it has? Likelihood, first thing, likelihood of the incident, anything bad happening, and the impact, potential impact it could have, right? So when we are talking about risk, so the risk is influenced by three factors. What is that? First is threat, second is vulnerability, and last one is asset. Valuables like cash, life, jewelry. Asset can be user device data. Great. So asset is anything which holds some value for you. Yes, something valuable to an organization like data, systems, reputation. Right? That is an asset. Threat is what? Anything which can lower the value of my asset or which can alter the value of my asset, that is threat. Anyone or any event who or which is capable of exploiting a vulnerability. Hackers, malwares, these are threats to our organization, to our data, to our assets, right? And then there is vulnerability. Vulnerability means loopholes, weakness. Great. So any loophole or any weakness in the system that can be exploited, like you have weak passwords, you have unpatched softwares, known vulnerabilities are there in your softwares, that is a vulnerability, right? So when we define risk, so we can define, let me clear it. Risk equals to threat multiplied by vulnerability multiplied by impact. That is risk. Now, when we talk about risk, right, how you will find out the likelihood, how much, how often it will happen, right? Then the impact, if it happens, how much impact it will do to our business organization. So let's say there is an organization, right? Now, the name of the organization is ABC. Now, this organization stores the sensitive data of their clients in their servers. So, the servers are not updated with the latest security patches, which will leave vulnerability in the system. Yes? Now, what will happen? First, you will find out threats. What will be the threats? Who will be the threats in this situation? Attackers, cyber criminals who are targeting the businesses with ransomware to encrypt data, demanding the payment, right? So we'll write here cyber criminals. Then what will be the vulnerability? What is the vulnerability? Identify the vulnerability. The scenario is that there is an organization ABC who stores the sensitive client data on its server, and the servers are not updated with the latest security patches, which leaves a vulnerability in the system. So for finding out the risk, what you have to do, you have to find out threats. So threats are cyber criminals, the attackers, or insider threats can be there, like Vivek said. Then there is vulnerability. We have to identify the vulnerability. So the name of the vulnerability given in the scenario is unpatched server. And the asset, what are the assets? What will be the asset in the scenario? The client personal data. The asset for us is the data that we have, right? Then we have to find out the likelihood of it, right? That how much, what is the likelihood of it uh, getting hacked? So the likelihood, let's say the likelihood is high, right? So since the attackers, they actively scan for unpatched vulnerabilities online, so they will somehow find, right? So let's say attackers will do information gathering. Now, if you might have heard, there is a search engine, shodan.io. Now, this shodan.io is a search engine where you can search for internet exposed organizations or devices or servers which are exposed to the internet, right? What Shodan does, Shodan is a search engine which knocks on every IP address available in this world and tries to get the information out of it. Then it will give you the information about that server or device, that how many ports are open, right? Which services are running, right? Which organization it is, right? Also, it will give you sometimes the exploits to which it is vulnerable, the exploit numbers to which the organization or that particular server is vulnerable. That also is given by Shodan. So attackers, they are actively looking for such kind of information, and that's why we have given likelihood equals to high, that attackers will find out that there is an outdated version of the software that they are using, and we can exploit the vulnerability. So if the likelihood is high, that means they will find out the vulnerability and impact will be severe. Then they will exploit the vulnerability and impact gets severe, right? The organization may face data loss, reputation damage, legal issues, financial loss due to ransom payments or downtime, right? So in this scenario, what you will suggest to the organization? Update the software regularly. Yes, whenever a new update arrives, test and install that update. Use strong access controls to restrict the unauthorized entry. Maintain secure backups of the critical data to avoid paying ransoms, right? And also implement employee training programs, right? So that if someone sends a malware through emails, even then they will not be able to get inside your organization because your employee knows how to safeguard yourself and will be able to identify if this email is legit or is this a phishing email, right? So that's what you can do in this scenario. That's how you define risk. Next thing, let's move to the next one, risk management. Now, what is risk management first thing? So the whole definition is in front of you. Risk management, it is the process of identifying, assessing, and mitigating the risk that could negatively impact an organization's goals, operations, assets, or reputation. It is a structured approach to anticipating potential threats, evaluating their likelihood and impact, and implementing strategies to reduce or eliminate those risks. So you are identifying, assessing, and mitigating the risk. That is your risk management. Now, the very first thing in risk management that we can see here is risk identification. Now, what is risk identification? First, you have to identify the risk, right? Find the risk. Problems. Great. Identifying and assessing the vulnerability in the IT infra. Great. Planning task in case of risk occurrence. Great. Which can become problem in future. Great. So, risk identification, it means you will recognize potential risk that could arise from internal factors or external factors like cyber threats, financial instability, or operational disruptions or compliance issues. Anything can be a risk for you, right? Now, here you will do asset valuation. Now, when we are talking about asset valuation, it is the part of risk identification and it is the process of finding out the value of an organization's asset to understand their importance and prioritize their protection, right? So, our goal is to assess how critical an asset is to the organization's operations, financial health, reputation, and overall goals, right? And it is very essential in the risk management process also. So it helps the organization to focus their resources on safeguarding the most valuable and vulnerable assets, right? So the most valuable and vulnerable assets have will be having the priority one, then there will be less prior, then there will be less prior, right? So for finding out the priority what to save first, you have to do risk assessment, right? And in risk assessment asset evaluation is very important, right? Now, assets are also of two types, tangible and intangible. Now, when we are talking about tangible assets, servers, laptops, network devices, facilities, anything which you can touch or feel, right? Intangible means anything which you cannot touch or feel, still it holds some value. So, data, intellectual property, customer information, brand reputation, right? So, that is intangible. So first what you will do, you will catalog all the tangible and intangible assets in the organization, then you will find out the value of it, monetary value of the asset, market value, replacement cost, right? Then find out the business value, right? So business value is not always money, but it can be customer trust or loss of reputation. That if this asset is lost, or the data of like let's say some organizations data is lost, then what you will do, your reputation will be lost, right? So that's business impact or business value, right? Then you will assess the criticality, find out the asset's role in supporting the business operations, find out the impact on operations if the asset is compromised. Then you will determine the sensitivity, assess the sensitivity of the information which is saved in the asset, like database with customer financial data that is highly sensitive and it must be protected, right? Then you will rank the assets based on their value and criticality, right? That's your asset valuation, right? You will do threat analysis, right? What is threat analysis? So threat analysis means you will identify, evaluate, and understand threats that could harm your organization's assets, operations, or reputation. So it helps you to assess how likely a threat is to occur, its potential impact, and how to prioritize mitigation strategies, right? So you will find out potential sources of threat, which can be external or internal. Like external can be external attackers, natural disasters, malwares. Internal can be insider threats, employee negligence, or misconfigurations, right? Find out the threats, understand those threats, then what is the likelihood that the threat will become, or like, or threat will be exposed, right? How probable it is for each threat to materialize. Then you will find out the impact, and after finding out the impact, what will be the reputation damage, what how much financial losses will be there, how much downtime will have to face, then you will prioritize those threat, and you will develop the strategies according to that, right? Then vulnerability assessment also happens. When we talk about vulnerability assessment here, vulnerability assessment means that you are assessing vulnerability, you are not exploiting the vulnerability. In vulnerability assessment, we never exploit the vulnerability, we only assess and find out if there is the vulnerability, then let's mitigate it or put some security measures in place of it. Yes. So if I have to do assessment, so there is a term which we use, which is vulnerability scanning. Now, vulnerability scanning means you will use a tool, right? A vulnerability scanning tool. So there are multiple tools like you use Nessus, you use uh, Burp Suite for scanning, you use Equinetics Web Vulnerability Scanner, right? Lots of tools are there, right? Metasploit has their own tools, right? Insight VM and all. So lots of tools are there that you can use for scanning the vulnerability. Now vulnerability scanner will give you the output. According to that output you will take the further steps. Then we have risk analysis. Now when we talk about risk analysis or risk assessment, so are both of these the same thing or a different thing? I have written a term, risk analysis slash assessment. Both of these are same things or different things. Pen test and vulnerability assessment are not same. As I said, in vulnerability assessment, what we do, we just scan and find out the vulnerabilities. But in pen testing, we confirm that if those vulnerabilities actually exist and they are exploitable in our environment or not. So in pen test, we exploit that vulnerability. So when we are talking about risk assessment, so risk assessment, it is the core component of your cybersecurity program. right? So it evaluates previously identified risk to determine their potential impact on the organization. And risk assessment methodologies, it has ad hoc, recurring, one time, or continuous, right? So if we talk about, let's say, ad hoc risk assessment. So ad hoc risk assessment, they are conducted as needed in response to specific incident, like there is a news of new or actively exploited zero-day vulnerability, or any changes, system changes that you have done, right? Or system upgrades you have done. Then if we talk about one-time assessment, one-time assessment means they these are comprehensive evaluations which are carried out at a particular point in time during the implementation of new system, or to obtain an independent assessment of an organization's operational maturity, right? Then we have recurring. Now, when we talk about recurring risk assessment, they are scheduled at regular intervals, like annually, quarterly, or monthly, and it can include audits, compliance checks, or vulnerability scans, and different types of assessment can be there, right? Then, if we talk about continuous, so continuous risk assessment, they constantly evaluate risk, and they are supported by specialized tools, right, that produce real-time data, like agent-based vulnerability scanning platforms, intrusion detection systems, right? That is risk assessment. So risk assessment is a systematic approach which is designed to estimate potential risk level and their significance by interpreting the whole data which you have collected during risk analysis. So the data you have collected in the risk analysis, that data is used in risk assessment. Then what is risk analysis? Risk analysis will describe the process of identifying and evaluating potential risk and the characteristics that define them, right? So risk analysis basically understand the nature and the scope of risk. Now, when we are talking about risk analysis and risk assessment, so risk analysis will be focusing on understanding the specific detail of the risk, and risk assessment is a broader approach. It includes risk analysis and decision making also, right? This is the exact pointer that you have to remember if you are ever comparing risk assessment and risk analysis, right? So let's say now you have understood risk assessment and risk analysis. Any questions in that? The output of risk analysis is used in risk assessment, Shivani. Now, again, let's take a scenario. Now, let's say there is a company, ABC. ABC is handling sensitive customer data and wants to address potential cybersecurity risk. So, in the first phase, as I said, we do risk analysis. So, in risk analysis, what will you find out? What will you do? There is an organization, ABC, who is holding sensitive customer data and they want to address potential cybersecurity risk to their organization, to their data. So, what steps you will take in risk analysis first? Identify potential threats. Great. So, you will first identify the threats, whether phishing, ransomware attacks, what are the threats to your organization. Then, after threats, understand the vulnerabilities. If there is a lack of multi-factor authentication, if there are some unpatched systems in your organization, then what you will do? What will be the next step? Evaluate the likelihood and impact. Great. So First, you will evaluate the likelihood and then impact. Phishing, if someone is doing so, phishing is highly likely based on recent attempts. Then, what will be the impact of it? Loss of customer trust, legal fines due to data breaches, right? This is risk analysis which you have done. Then you will perform risk assessment. Now, when we are talking about risk assessment, so as I said, on the basis of output of risk analysis, you will do risk assessment. So in risk assessment, what will be the first step? We have already identified the threats. So we have identified the vulnerabilities, likelihood, and impact and risk analysis. Now risk assessment. Evaluating the risk, okay. And after evaluating, what to do? So in risk assessment, the very first thing that you will do is prioritize the risk. You have to prioritize the risk based on their likelihood and impact. Which risk will be at the top and which risk will be at the bottom. Then, next thing, what you will do? Responses. Find out the responses to mitigate the risk, right? And then, after determining the responses, develop actionable plan. For risk management, like employee training, incident response strategies, what things you have to do, you will do that. So that's how you do risk assessment. There are further many other steps, but these are the general steps that we take for a small scenario. Now that's risk assessment and risk analysis. Then we also have here likelihood. So likelihood means probability of a potential vulnerability being exploited, right? Then exposure, if we talk about, so exposure is what? The degree to which assets, systems, or individuals are exposed when vulnerability is exploited, right? And impact, the magnitude of harm that can be expected when vulnerability will be exploited, right? So if in the context of disaster like hurricane, if we are talking about, so the likelihood is the probability that the particular area will be hit by the hurricane or not. Exposure will be what in the case of hurricane? So exposure, it refers to the population, critical infrastructure like hospitals, schools, power plants that are at risk from the hurricane. And impact will be, so impact will be if a hurricane strike, then it can cause economic loss, human lives might be lost, infrastructure will be lost. So that will be impact. Economy will be down, right? So that is impact, right? So that is your risk analysis, assessment, likelihood, exposure, and impact. A common risk assessment activity will do what? It will identify the risk of fire to a building, let's say, right? There are many ways to mitigate this that risk. The primary goal of risk assessment is what? So the primary goal of risk assessment is to estimate and prioritize, right? So if we are talking about fire, fire alarms are the lowest cost and they can alert the personnel to evacuate and reduce the risk of personal injury, but they won't keep a fire from spreading or causing more damage, right? Sprinklers are there, right? We use sprinklers. Sprinkler system more won't prevent a fire, but it can minimize the amount of damage done, right? So sprinklers in a data center limit the fire spread, right? It is likely they will destroy all the systems and data on them because that's water, right? A gas based system may be the best solution to protect the system, but it might be costly. So, risk assessment can prioritize these items for management to determine the method of mitigation that will best suit the assets to be protected from fire. In data centers, we cannot keep sprinklers because it will, rather than saving us, it will do more harm to our systems than fire is doing. Fire is doing harm to them. It's burning it, but still sprinklers, it's also damaging it. So that the best solution will be told by whom? Risk assessment. That will be gas-based solutions you can use. Correct. In case of data security, we can say network isolation in case of an exploit to make sure other part of network is safe. So that we do in incident response whenever we containment we do. So we remove the either the segment of the network or some devices which are under attack from the network so that the impact is less. Now, and next thing that we have is types of risk assessment. So we have qualitative and quantitative. The very first one we have is qualitative. What is qualitative? So here, if you can see, we have not given any numeric values. There are no numeric values present, right? So qualitative risk assessment is a subjective method of assessing risk based on their probability, right? Based on their impact. So instead of assigning numeric values, it uses descriptive categories like low, medium, or high, right? So if you can see impact, catastrophic, moderate, here it's high, high, excessive, excessive, then significant, low, moderate, high, high, excessive, right? We have not given any values. Now, when we are talking about qualitative, so it relies on expert judgment and discussions, right? They will take the decision on the basis of that. And there will be risk matrices like you can see on the screen, and then there will be heat maps to visualize the risk, and it is useful when you don't have precise data available, right? And when you have to make decision quickly, right? So let's say we are talking about qualitative risk assessment. There is a financial company who is assessing risk related to its operations, right? So the risk which was found is phishing, employees falling victim to phishing emails. Likelihood. What will be the likelihood of it? It's high, let's say, right? So impact will be medium. It could compromise sensitive data, but mitigation strategies like endpoint detection, they exist. So that's why we are putting it medium, right? And categorization, in categorization, you will put high risk. So what will be the outcome of it? What risk is phishing? The employee will fall into the trap of phishing. Likelihood is high. Categorization is high risk, right? What will be the outcome of this qualitative risk assessment? What you will suggest after looking at this? What you will suggest to that organization? How to mitigate it? That's the question now. So, when we are talking about phishing, security awareness training will be the best scenario that you will be suggesting to the organization, that give security awareness training to your employees so that they don't fall in the trap, right? Then we have quantitative risk assessment. Now, quantitative means numbers. So, quantitative risk assessment, it is a data-driven approach that uses numeric values to measure risk in terms of likelihood, impact, and financial cost, and based on historical data, statistical models, and probabilities. So, it helps in decision making by providing a clear cost benefit analysis, and it requires accurate data to achieve meaningful results, right? So, if we talk about the concrete values that we are talking about, right? We have SLE, single loss expectancy. Now, SLE is what? This is the amount that would be lost in a single occurrence of the risk factor. So, if there is a vulnerability which we have found, if that vulnerability is exploited only once, then how much you will lose, right? So, how you will find out? You will find out asset value multiplied by exposure factor, right? Now, exposure factor is what? It is the percentage of asset value that would be lost, right? So, for example, let's say there is a tornado weather event. It will damage 40% of the building if it happens. So, the exposure factor will be 40%. Once it happens, 40% will be lost, right? If the cost of the building is, let's say, $200,000, this event will be, what will be the SLE for it? 200,000 multiplied by 0.4. So you will lose $80,000 if the tornado strikes only once a year, right? Then we have ALE, annualized loss expectancy. So this is the amount that will be lost over a course of a year. Now, how it is found? SLE multiplied by ARO. ARO is annual rate of occurrence. So it tells you the number of times in a year that an event occurs. So, in the same example, if we talk about, it is anticipated that tornado event will cause an impact twice a year, right? So, ARO will be 2, right? And ALE will be $80,000 multiplied by 2, which is equals to $160,000. That will be the loss per year. So this number is useful when you are considering different ways to protect the building from tornadoes. If it is known that tornadoes will have $160,000 per year average cost, then this can be used as a comparison when you are considering the cost for various protections for the organization, right? And it is very important to realize that the value of an asset does not refer solely to its material value. Let's say that there is an organization, a vulnerability is found in that organization, and it is found that single loss expectancy for that organization is, let's say, $2,000, right? If the vulnerability is exploited once by the attacker, the organization will lose $2,000, right? And annual rate of occurrence is, let's say, 4 times it will happen. So total in a year you will lose $8,000. The organization will lose $8,000. Now you are working in the risk assessment team. So what you will do, if the mitigation cost you $50,000 per year. What will be your take on it? Let the incident happen, accept the risk. What others say? Everyone has to participate. We can host nothing, right? Because we can afford losing $8,000, but per year, $50,000, that will be tough for the organization. So now we have the part of risk treatment. Now, when we talk about risk treatment, how can we treat the risk? Risk avoidance. What is risk avoidance? So, with risk avoidance, what we can do, business owners, they won't run their company in a way that puts themselves at a specific risk. So, you may realize sending employees for business work to a particular neighborhood which is prone to robbery and theft. It might pose risk to employees. So, to reduce risk and avoid potential losses, you decide not to send them to that area, right? So, avoidance means to stop the activity that is causing risk, right? There is a company, let's say that company may develop an internally developed application for managing the inventory and then try to sell it. Now, during the sales process, application may be discovered to have lots of vulnerabilities, which is generating complaints and threat of legal action. So, company may decide that the cost of maintaining the security of the software is not worth the revenue. Avoidance is the credible option. Then we have risk transference. What is risk transference? Transferring the risk, passing it to someone else. So transference means passing, or you can also call it sharing. You are sharing the risk. So it means assigning risk to a third party like insurance company. So you are paying premiums, regular premiums to the company. In exchange for the premium, the insurer agrees to cover certain types of losses or damages, which is specified in the policy: accident, theft, damage to your vehicle, right? Or your data in the organization. Then we have risk acceptance. Now, when we are talking about risk acceptance, can I call it risk tolerance also? Yes, we can, right? So, risk acceptance means that no countermeasures are put in place because the level of risk does not justify it. So, we can accept it. Like the situation we already discussed, that the cost of mitigation is more than the cost of the losses. So, we'll accept that risk, right? That is risk acceptance. And then risk mitigation, it is called risk remediation also. Right? So that is the overall process of reducing exposure to the effects of risk factors, right? And what we call a countermeasure which will reduce the exposure to the threat or vulnerability. Treatment means you are mitigating it 100%. But when you are reducing it, reducing the exposure to a threat, that is risk deterrence. Perfect. Then we have regulation and compliance, right? Now, when we are talking about regulation and compliance, what are these? There is a term, legislation. Industry regulations, rules and regulations, steps to be taken, legal and ethical, right? policies and laws made by different non-profit organizations like HIPAA. So there is a term legislation. Legislation refers to the laws or directives which are established by a government or governing body. So these laws they vary across countries and industries, right? Then we have regulations, right? Now when we are talking about regulations, these are detailed rules or guidelines that specify how the law should be followed or applied, right? And then we have compliance. Compliance means that the company adheres to applicable rules and laws, and it includes both country specific laws and requirements from regulatory authorities, right? So, compliance can be proven by keeping thorough records, and it is validated by audits, which can be internal audit, external audit, right? Now, we have heard different compliances, like most famous one, GDPR, HIPAA for the medical industry, right? So GDPR, it applies to every organization worldwide that handles or manages the personal data of European Union citizens, right? So in GDPR, if I'm talking about, so legislation means the Europeans government legislative authority, it allows for creation of the GDPR. Regulation here means the GDPR itself is the regulation that provide the detailed rule for the data protection. And compliance, the multinational corporation implements various measures to comply with GDPR, like you have to appoint a data protection officer, right? And you have to conduct data protection internal assessments, right? Then standard. When we are talking about standard, widely accepted industrial specification, the corporation adopts ISO 27001, ISO 27701 standards to facilitate GDPR compliance, right? So that is regulation and compliance related to risk. Define zero trust and identity and access management. Anyone? So when we are talking about zero trust and identity access framework, they are very closely related concepts in cybersecurity, right? And but they serve different purposes and different operate at different levels. So when we are talking about zero trust, it is a security framework which is based on the principle never trust, always verify. So it assumes that threat can come from both inside and outside the network. So every access request must be verified, right? So for zero trust, there are some core principles. First, explicit verification. Now, when we talk about explicit verification, it means always authenticate and authorize based on all available data points like user identity, device health, location, anywhere, right? Then least privilege. Least privilege means the users and devices are granted the minimum access which is necessary to perform their task, right? And the third one is assume breach, right? Continuously monitor and validate access to minimize the impact of potential breaches, right? So when we are talking about the zero trust and the scope of zero trust, so zero trust is a holistic security model which encompasses identity, devices, network, applications, and data, right? And it emphasizes continuous verification and strict access control to protect all the resources in the network. Then we have identity and access management. The access controls that we are implementing, those access control in the zero trust we are implementing through identity and access management. So it is a framework of policies, processes, and technologies which is used to manage and secure user identities and control access to the resources, right? What we do in that: authentication, Authentication means, how will you define authentication? Checking the identity, allow after verification, verifying the identity, a user, who the authorized person. Great. So authentication means verifying the user identity, verifying if the user is same who he or she is claiming to be, right? Password, multi-factor authentication, PIN, RFID cards, those are used in authentication. Then we have authorization. What is authorization? That means everyone is aware about it. Authorization means granting or denying the access based on the rules and permissions, right? So whether you are allowed to access any resource inside the organization or not, that's what that is authorization. Accounting. What is accounting? Okay. Now accounting basically here, accounting means taking care of the thing, like who will, it's not that who will be hold accountable. It is something which is kind of thing you are taking a track of the events happening, right? So who is logging in, who is logging out, who is entering to the organization, who is going out of the organization. So that's that's accounting, right? Now the thing is that we have discussed about zero trust. We have already discussed about identity and access management. So how both of these they work together? IAM is what? It is a critical component of implementing a zero trust model, right? Like we have authentication and authorization we have discussed. So IAM provides the tools like multi-factor authentication, single sign-on to verify the identities and enforce access policies, aligning with zero trust, never trust, always verify principle. Then we also have least privilege access. IAM enforces role-based access control, which is a key tenet of zero trust. And then the last one, continuous monitoring. So IAM solutions can integrate with the zero trust system to provide real-time identity verification and access control. So IAM is a foundational element that enables the implementation of zero trust principles. Then next thing that we have is incident response. Now before learning about incident response, so when we are talking about incident, can I say any event went adverse? Any event went adverse, any event went wrong, that is incident. And when we are talking about incident response, what is that? When we are talking about incident response, it is the approach that what steps you will take when an incident happens in your organization, right? What you will respond to it, what will be the first steps that you will be taking, and there will be a person who will be called first responder, who will be identifying whether it is an incident or not, and if it is an incident, then how will you respond to it? What will be your response? Next, what we have steps in the incident response process. So when we are doing incident response, so we should have an approach that what steps we'll be taking. And these are the steps that you put in the implementation of incident response, that what things should be there and how hierarchy will be followed, right? The very first step for incident response that we have is preparation, that you have to stay prepared for the incident response with the tools, right? So you will build the foundation for responding to incident by establishing new tools, policies, and your incident response team, right? So you will develop and document the incident response plan. You will train all the personnel on security protocols and how to report the incident, right? Then you will set up monitoring systems, right? Intrusion detection systems, firewalls, logging systems, and you will make sure regular backups and patching of critical systems are there, right? So, for example, an organization regularly trains its employees on how to identify and report phishing attempts and deploy tools like security information and event management for monitoring the traffic like Splunk, IBM QRadar, right? Then we have incident recording and assignment. So record all the details about the incident and assign the response to a relevant team or individual. Yes, what you will do in that? Record incident details: who, what, when, how it happened. Assign a ticket or case to appropriate response team like SOC team or uh, IT security team you will be assigning, right? Then we have incident triage. What is incident triage? Prioritize the incident based on its severity, impact, and urgency. So you will assess the scope of the incident. Is it isolated? Is it widespread? Categorize the incident like low severity, medium severity, or high severity. Then prioritize incident that require immediate action, like attacks that could lead to data breaches. So after analyzing the reported suspicious activity, the response team determines it's a ransomware infection affecting a single system. Given the potential for rapid spread, it's classified as high priority, right? Then arrives your notification. When we are talking about notification, so you'll inform key stakeholders and teams about the incident, right? Internal response teams, management, the affected departments, and if necessary, notify the external stakeholders like regulators, legal teams, customers, and provide clear instructions that what steps you will be taking, like isolating the system, changing the passwords, right? For example, the incident response team, uh, it will send an alert to the IT department, and the alert will be instructing them to disconnect the infected machine from the network. The management and legal teams are also informed about the ongoing investigation, right? Then we have containment. Now, when we are talking about containment, it means limit the damage and prevent the incident from spreading further, right? So, short-term containment, so you will isolate affected system for a short period of time, right? Then long-term containment means apply temporary fixes like disabling compromised accounts and blocking malicious IPs. So the system will be isolated from the network to stop the ransomware from spreading in the whole organization, right? Then evidence gathering and forensic analysis happens. So collect and analyze data related to the incident to understand the scope, origin of the attack. So capture logs, memory dumps, network traffic analysis, physical evidence, digital evidence to identify the attacker or the method used. Then you have to preserve the evidence also, right? Then eradication. After finding out the root cause of the incident, like evidence gathering and forensic analysis, you will do root cause analysis. So remove the root cause of the incident and eliminate any remaining threats, right? Remove the malware, the compromised files, or vulnerabilities exploited in the attack. Patch the systems or application, reconfigure the firewalls, remove unauthorized access, right? Ensure that all traces of the incident are thoroughly eliminated from the system, right? Then comes to recovery. So recovery means restore affected systems and services to their normal state. So restore systems from clean backups, test to make sure that the systems are fully functional and secure, monitor systems closely to detect any signs of issues or reinfection, right? And then post incident activities, right? So post incident activities, it contain post incident review. Review the incident, identify the lessons which you have learned, to improve future responses. So you will conduct a detailed post-mortem analysis of the incident response process, right? You will document what went well and what needs improvement, and update the incident response policies and improve detection and defense mechanisms. Next, you have a case study, Colonial Pipeline ransomware. So in May 2021, Colonial Pipeline, the largest fuel pipeline operator in US, suffered a ransomware attack by the DarkSide cyber criminal group. So the attacker gained access through a compromised VPN password that lacked multi-factor authentication, encrypting the critical IT systems. As a precaution, the company shut down pipeline operations and causing widespread fuel shortages across the East Coast. So, in response, Colonial Pipeline paid $4.4 million ransom through the FBI later recovered $2.3 million. The attack exposed critical gaps in the incident response, IM controls, and network security, which led to significant cybersecurity reforms in the industry, right? So if I have to create an incident out of it, so there are attackers, right? Attackers were DarkSide ransomware group. Impact was fuel supply disruption across US East Coast. Cause was compromised VPN password. Ransom paid 4.4 million, out of which 2.3 millions were recovered. Now, incident response steps, if we go to the incident response steps, we have preparation phase. In the preparation phase, what they were lacking: limited ransomware preparedness, weak IM controls, incident record and triage, identified breach, escalated to FBI and cybersecurity firms. Good move. Then their notification informed government agencies and public. For containment, shut down pipeline operations, isolated the networks. For forensic analysis, investigated the attack vector and found 100 GB data exfiltration. Eradication, for eradication, what they did, they paid ransomware, restored the systems from backups. And recovery, gradual service restoration, for operation resumed in a week, right? Then post incident activities or actions, they implemented multi-factor authentication, network segmentation they did, and they enhanced their monitoring. So that's what we did.